The card sat on the table in front of Stephen for a long moment before he turned it over. It was a small thing, folded once down the center, the kind of paper that had been handled carefully. His name was not on it, but the name that was printed there, Marin Holt, and below it, Holt Property Holdings, and below that, an address in the city, was a name he had seen before. Not on a business card, on a sign outside a building he had walked past for years without thinking much about it. On the letterhead of the correspondence that had been sitting in Dolores Crane's office for the past 3 weeks, which she had shown him once, briefly, with the casual confidence of someone who believed the other person in the room could not read a room at all. He set the card down on the kitchen table next to the small brass compass he had laid there beside it. He sat with both of them for a while. Then he went to work. The Meridian Supper Club had been open for 19 years. When Stephen first walked through its service entrance carrying a reference letter and a good pair of shoes, he had been the floor manager for 11 of those years, which meant he knew the placement of every table, the weight of every door, the particular creak of the third floorboard in the corridor that ran between the kitchen and the private dining room. He knew which regulars drank too much on Thursdays and which ones needed their water glasses filled before they asked. He knew the name of every person on the floor staff and the names of most of their children. He had never once been invited to sit at any of the tables he managed. Dolores ran the Meridian with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what kind of establishment she had. It was not a fine dining room. It was not a dive. It was a place that drew from a specific radius of the county. Retired professionals, local families marking anniversaries, the occasional traveling visitor who had heard the lamb was worth stopping for. Dolores had inherited it from her husband's uncle and had made it profitable through a combination of consistent food, careful pricing, and the particular kind of charm she deployed in the dining room, which was warm enough to feel genuine and measured enough to be deliberate. She was good at it. Stephen had observed her for 11 years, and he still could not fault her for the work. What he could not reconcile, and had stopped trying to, was the way she spoke about the people who made the work possible. She spoke about Stephen the way a decorator speaks about a useful piece of furniture. In his hearing, when she was in a certain mood, she would say things like, "Stephen keeps things running along," or "Stephen handles the floor nicely." Not to him, around him, as if his presence in the room was a given, like the lighting, and not worth directing any particular acknowledgement toward. When she introduced him to guests, she said, "This is our floor manager," and sometimes she said his name after that, and sometimes she did not. He had learned not to track it. B. Wicks had worked the supper club floor since before Stephen arrived, and she had a way of observing all of this that she occasionally shared in a single, dry sentence. One night in early November, she had refilled Stephen's coffee behind the bar during the post-close and said, without preamble, "She introduced me to a table last week as our girl B. I've worked here 13 years. Stephen did not say anything. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup and looked at the clean surface of the bar. "You notice she does that," B said. "Titles instead of names." "I notice," he said. "Doesn't bother you," B said, and it was not a question. "It bothers me," Stephen said. "I just don't know what to do with it, so I put it somewhere." B looked at him for a moment with the particular attention she reserved for things she found true and did not need to compliment. Then she went back to rolling silverware. The card nights had been running in the back room of the Meridian for 6 years, every Tuesday. The back room was not officially part of the supper club's floor. It had been a storage room at some point, and then a room where the wine delivery came through, and then, gradually, a room with a round table and 6 chairs and a lamp that B had brought in from home. Dolores knew about the game and had no opinion about it as long as it finished before midnight, and the participants were people she recognized. The players were regulars mostly, Don Ashby, who owned the grain elevator and played with the relaxed inaccuracy of someone for whom the stakes were entirely social. A retired schoolteacher named Callie Marsh, who played very well and smiled about it in a way that telegraphed nothing. A plumber named Ray Steger, who kept excellent cards and questionable company, and who everyone at the table respected because of this. And two others, whose attendance varied. Stephen sat in when the floor was settled, and Dolores had gone home for the evening, which was most Tuesdays. The 7th Tuesday of that autumn, a new player came. He was not remarkable in any way that Stephen catalogued in the first 10 minutes. Medium height, a worn brown jacket with the collar turned up, the kind of face that looked like it had been outside recently. He had come in through the side entrance, which meant someone had told him about the game, and he sat in the empty chair to Stephen's left without making anything of his arrival. Don introduced him as Marin, gave no last name, and dealt the first hand. He did not play like someone who was learning. He had the particular patience of a person who had played a great deal and no longer needed to show it. The first thing Stephen noticed was the jacket. The collar was worn at the right point of the fold, which meant it had been turned up in the same way for a long time, not put on for an evening. The lining, visible at the cuff, was good. Not new, not cheap. Something chosen once and maintained since. Stephen had spent enough years on a floor reading what people wore to know the difference between a worn jacket and a jacket that had earned its wear. The second thing he noticed was the way Marin held his cards. One hand flat, as if the cards were already decided. Don was dealing fast that first night, in the loose way he dealt when he was enjoying himself more than competing. And on the third hand, Ray Steger made a remark about the new player's bet that was not quite an insult, but was near enough to one that the room went briefly quiet in the way rooms do when a line has been approached. Ray had a particular humour that worked better in other company. He dealt in implications. Stephen refilled Marin's glass from the bottle on the table without being asked and said, quietly enough for it to be a private remark, "Ray's like that with everyone the first night. He stops by the third." Marin looked at him. "Does he?" he said. "He does," Stephen said. "He's actually a decent hand. He just needs to feel out the room first." Marin looked back at his cards. After a moment, he said, "Thank you for that." He said it the way you say something you mean to say and have chosen to say directly, without performing the gratitude. Stephen noted it the way he noted the jacket lining, filed it where he kept things that were true. The first game ended at 11:15 with Callie winning, as she usually did, and the group dispersed with the low-key ease of people who expected to do this again in 7 days. Marin folded his winnings, modest, into the chest pocket of the jacket and said goodnight to no one in particular, and to Stephen specifically, with one brief nod. He was back the following Tuesday. The second game, Stephen watched him lose 2 hands to Don that he should have won. The tells were there for anyone paying attention. Marin had the cards, played them short, and let the pot go in a way that was just credible enough to read as conservative play. Stephen said nothing. He watched. He looked at the pile in front of Marin at the end of the night, and then at the pile in front of himself, and noticed that the two were nearly equivalent in a way that did not match what had happened across the table for 2 hours. The third game, Stephen said nothing still. He played his own game carefully, the way he always did, winning small and losing small, and keeping the room comfortable. He noticed that the losses Marin took were distributed in a way that kept the table feeling balanced, which meant Marin understood the table well enough to manage it without appearing to. He noticed that the one hand Marin played fully, without restraint, was the hand he played against Stephen, and that the win was clean and quiet and worth nothing in particular. After the third game, while the others were pulling on their coats, Marin said to him, without looking up from the table where he was stacking chips for the count, You play honestly. Everyone at this table plays honestly, Stephen said. Not the same thing, Marin said. He looked up then. Stephen looked back at him. The lamp put a warm, low light across the table between them, and the room smelled of the coffee Bea had left in the pot by the door. No, Stephen said. I suppose it isn't. He walked home that night with the feeling of a sentence he had not finished. Bea had noticed Marin by the second game and had her own assessment, which she shared over the post-close coffee with the brevity she reserved for conclusions she was confident in. The man in the brown jacket, she said, does not need to be at that table. Stephen looked at her. For the money, Bea said. I mean, he doesn't need to be there for the money. Why do you think he's there? Stephen asked. Bea set down her cup. I think he's deciding something. Stephen let that sit. Dolores had begun in the second week of November to speak frequently about the investor dinner. The dinner was not a fixed date yet, but she spoke about it as if it were imminent in the way people speak about things they have been thinking about for a long time. A serious buyer, she said. A firm that handled hospitality and property both. She mentioned figures loosely, not to Stephen, but in his vicinity. Numbers that suggested the Meridian was worth more as a property than as a going concern, which was a calculation Dolores had apparently been doing in private for some time. She had been running the club for 19 years, and she was tired. She said that once, directly to Stephen, which surprised him with its candour, and then she moved away from it quickly as if the candour had cost her something. Stephen managed the floor and said nothing. The fourth and fifth card nights moved in a pattern he had by now memorized. Marin arrived, sat to his left, played with the same contained competence, lost to everyone else in amounts that kept the table pleasant, and won against Stephen in the single hand. He played fully. They talked between hands with the ease that had developed over several Tuesdays. Small exchanges, the kind that do not demand anything. About the food Bea left at the door of the back room, about the temperature of November, about a book Callie had mentioned that both of them had apparently read. The exchanges were short. They were enough. On the fifth night, Marin arrived with a small cut on his left hand, along the base of the thumb, the kind of thing you get from a latch or a wire. Stephen noticed it the way he noticed the jacket, the cards, the particular way the man held a coffee cup. He noticed without noting it aloud, and it was not until they were 3 hands into the game that he picked up the dish towel from the bar tray and held it out across the table without a word. Marin looked at the towel. It's clean, Stephen said. It's been bleeding into your cuff for 20 minutes. A brief pause. Then Marin took the towel and pressed it to his hand. I didn't think anyone had seen that, he said. I see most things, Stephen said. It's the job. Is it always the job? Marin asked. Stephen considered that. No, he said. He picked up his cards. The 6th card night fell on the Tuesday before the investor dinner, and the supper club had been running at a low hum all week that Stephen recognized as Dolores' performing readiness. She had the tables polished an extra time. She had spoken to the kitchen twice about the lamb preparation. She had walked the dining room on Monday evening while Stephen was setting the floor, and stopped in the middle of the room and looked at it with the expression of someone trying to see a thing for the first time who already knows what they are going to see. She had also spoken to Stephen that afternoon about the dinner's guest list. There'll be 6, she said. Very private, Thursday evening. I want you on the floor for the first hour and then Martin can take it from there. Martin was 23 and had been on the floor for 4 months and was perfectly capable of managing a 6-person dinner. Stephen understood what the instruction meant. He was the presentable opening. He was not the person Dolores wanted seen when the serious conversation started. Of course, he said. She moved away to the kitchen. He stood in the middle of the dining room and looked at the polished tables and the clean glasses and the low, warm light of the room he had managed for 11 years. He noted what he felt, which was something in the region of tired, and filed it where he kept such things, and went back to work. On Monday evening, the day before the 6th game, Stephen was finishing the late close behind the bar when he heard Dolores's voice through the narrow gap in the corridor door. The kitchen corridor ran beside the small office she used for bookkeeping, and the door to that office had a particular latch that did not close cleanly unless you pulled it toward you, which Dolores never remembered to do. Stephen had fixed it 4 times, and the habit had never changed. He heard her voice, and he heard another voice, a woman he did not recognize, and he was not intending to listen. He was setting down glasses. He heard his own name. He stopped. Dolores said in the tone of someone describing something only incidentally important. Stephen's very good at keeping the room feeling warm. Very easy to look at. Good instincts with people. A pause. But you understand he's not someone I'd include in discussions of the actual transaction. He's floor management. He's been here a long time and the guests respond to him. That's the value. The other woman said something Stephen could not fully hear. Dolores said, "Decorative. Yes, that's the right word, really." She laughed lightly, the way people laugh when they have found the precise word for something they have known for a while. Stephen set down the last glass. He stood in the kitchen corridor for a moment with one hand flat on the cool surface of the bar, not moving, just registering the temperature of the room against his palm. Then he finished the close, turned off the bar lights and walked home with the clean, specific knowledge of what he had always known, but had not, until now, been forced to carry in such plain terms. He did not sleep well. He went to work Tuesday because he always went to work. He managed the floor. He spoke to B, who noticed something in his face and said nothing about it except to make his coffee before he asked. He set the dining room for the Wednesday service. He moved through the supper club with the same contained competence he had brought to it for 11 years, and he noted that it felt different in a way he could not precisely name, like a room you have lived in for years that looks slightly changed after you have been away. That evening, the 6th card night, he sat across the table from Maren and played 4 hands, and lost 2, and won 1, and folded on the last. He said less than usual. Maren said less than usual in return, which was how he read a room. At the end of the evening, when the others had gone, Maren stayed to help Stephen stack the chairs. He did not ask what was wrong. He picked up a chair and set it on the table and picked up another. Stephen said, without planning to, "Do you know when someone has decided what you are and stopped looking?" Maren set down the chair he was holding. "Yes," he said. "It's a particular feeling," Stephen said. "I think I'd been protecting myself from knowing it for a long time." "What changed?" Maren asked. Stephen looked at the empty table. "I heard the word she uses for me," he said, out loud to someone else. A pause. "I see," Maren said. They finished stacking the chairs in silence. Maren put on his jacket and Stephen held the door, and at the threshold Maren stopped and looked at him with the direct, unhurried attention Stephen had come to recognize in him, the attention of someone who is not looking past you at anything. "Come back Thursday," Maren said. "Not for the game, just come back here, 7 o'clock. Stephen looked at him. "Why?" he said. "Because I'm asking," Maren said. He went. He did not know why, except that 11 years of reading a room told him that some invitations were not casual, and that this one carried a weight that he did not fully understand, and was not, yet, willing to refuse. The card nights had a rhythm that Stephen had learned the way you learn the creak of a particular floorboard, through repetition, without trying to. The 7th game fell 2 nights after the investor dinner Dolores had been preparing for, and Stephen arrived at the back room at 7 on Thursday, as Maren had asked before the others had come. Maren was already there. The lamp was on. The coffee was made, which meant B had been by. There were 2 cups on the tray. Maren was sitting in his usual chair, jacket on, the worn collar turned up. He had a glass of water in front of him that he was not drinking. Stephen sat down. They did not talk for a moment. Then Maren poured the coffee and pushed 1 cup across the table and said, "How was Thursday?" "I was on the floor for 40 minutes, Stephen said. Then I was relieved." "How was the room?" Maren asked. 8 people at the table, Stephen said. A man I didn't recognize, 2 people from the city, by their coats. Dolores was dressed for an occasion. He paused. The man she was courting was not there yet when I left the floor. Maren said nothing. "She was nervous," Stephen said. "I could see it. She's good at not showing it, but I've worked for her for 11 years. "What was she nervous about?" Maren asked. "The meeting," Stephen said. "The sale she's selling. She's been ready to sell for 2 years, and she finally has a buyer who wants to come and look at the room." He picked up his coffee. "She wanted the room to look the way it looks best. She knows how to do that. That's not the part she was nervous about." "What was the part?" Maren asked. Stephen set down his cup. "Whether the buyer would see it the same way she does," he said. "Whether the value she's assigned to everything would hold up in the other direction." Maren looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "The others will be here in an hour. I wanted to ask you something before they arrived." "All right," Stephen said. "The last hand tonight," Maren said. "Play it with me, just the 2 of us. Whatever you'd put in, I'll match it." Stephen looked at him. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means I'm asking," Maren said. It was the second time he had said that, and the second time Stephen found he did not have a useful objection to it. The others arrived at 8, and the game settled into its Tuesday rhythm. Don's loose dealing and Ray's sharp humour and Callie's particular quiet confidence. Stephen played his usual game and watched Maren play his, which had not changed in 6 weeks. Contained, patient, balanced across the table in the way that kept everyone's evening pleasant. He lost to Don twice and to Ray once, and folded against Callie with the clean brevity of someone who had read the hand correctly and had no investment in pretending otherwise. When the hands came down to just the 2 of them, the others pushed back from the table with the relaxed agreement of people who understood this was a different kind of game. Stephen had the brass compass in his jacket pocket. He had carried it since his father gave it to him 22 years ago, a thing worn smooth at the dial, solid and small, and exactly the weight of something kept. He had never put it on a table before. He set it in the middle of the felt now, because Maren had asked him to play it honestly, and he did not know how to do that halfway. He looked at Maren. Maren looked at the compass. Then he reached into the inside pocket of the brown jacket and took out a folded piece of paper and set it beside the compass. The hand was not complicated. Stephen had good cards. Maren had, by every readable signal, better ones. And when he laid them down, Stephen felt the clean, unhurried recognition of having played correctly and lost anyway, which was a kind of dignity he understood. He reached out and picked up the folded paper. He did not open it at the table. He put it in his pocket beside the compass. Maren said, "It's yours." Stephen looked at him. He did not know, in that moment, what it was. He knew it was not nothing. He knew the weight of things offered carefully. The others drifted out, Don counting his take and Ray already putting on his coat, Callie giving Stephen the small nod she gave at the end of evenings when she was satisfied with the game. B came in to collect the coffee cups and looked at the table with the specific attention of someone who noticed that something had shifted, and then looked at Stephen, and then looked at the door through which Maren had just walked, and said nothing at all, which meant she had filed something. He opened the card at his kitchen table at 11:15, with the brass compass beside it. It was a printed business card. White stock, clean sans serif type. The name at the top was Maren Holt. Below it, Holt Property Holdings. Below that, a city address. Stephen sat with it for a long time. He had seen the letterhead before on the correspondence in Dolores's office, the one she had shown him briefly and without expectation, the way you show a document to someone who is present in the room but not relevant to its contents. He had noted the name because he noted things. He had not connected it to the man in the brown jacket for the simple reason that the idea had not occurred to him as a possible geography. The man in the brown jacket was the man at the card table, and the card table was a room in the back of the supper club where the lamp came from B's house. And nothing in that room had suggested anything other than what it appeared to be. He read the card again. Then he looked at the compass, which sat where he had placed it and was not going anywhere. He thought about the conversation at the 5th card night, Maren pressing the dish towel to his hand. He thought about the first night, when Maren had thanked him for the remark about Ray, directly and without performance. He thought about the careful losses, the balanced table, the single hand played fully each night and always against him. He thought about Maren asking him to play honestly and not offering any reason for the asking. He sat with all of it for a while. Then he went to bed, because there was work in the morning and he had learned a long time ago that the things you need to understand have a better shape after sleep. The investor dinner was Saturday. Dolores had rescheduled it from Thursday by 1 day, which Stephen learned from the kitchen calendar, and he had not yet understood why. He understood it the following evening when B, who had been covering the bar setup and had heard more of the planning conversations than she was meant to, sat down across from Stephen at the end of the Wednesday service and said, "The Thursday dinner didn't go the way she expected." Stephen looked up. "She said the buyer sent a representative," B said. "A woman in a grey coat, very polite, took notes, didn't commit to anything." B folded her hands on the table. "She asked a great many questions about the floor management, about who had been here longest, about what the regular clientele responded to." Stephen was quiet. "She asked by name," B said. "She asked about you by name." He set down his coffee. "Dolores rescheduled for Saturday," B said. "She told me the buyer is coming in person this time." Stephen looked at the bar, the clean glass surface of it, the stacked glasses. "Did she say the buyer's name?" he asked. B looked at him with the patient attention she had been giving him since November. "She said it was the Holt firm," she said. "The principal was coming personally." Stephen set down his cup. "All right," he said. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of late autumn cold that comes in through the windows of a room you have heated carefully. The Meridian was dressed for it. Dolores had the candles out, the good linen, the lamb on the menu alongside the winter vegetables from the farm 20 minutes north. Stephen was on the floor at 5:30, running the close check on the 6 tables, straightening the settings that did not need straightening and the ones that did. B was at the service station, laying out napkins with the precise, unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this more times than she had counted. She watched Stephen moving between the tables and said, from across the room, "You look like you're waiting for something." "I'm working," he said. "You're working and you're waiting," she said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." He did not answer. He straightened the last fork on the 6th table and looked at the room. The guests arrived at 7. They came in pairs the way dinner guests do, and Stephen managed the door and the coats and the initial direction to the table with the smooth, unthinking ease of 11 years. Dolores was in the room in a charcoal dress that was the right dress for what she was trying to convey, and she moved through the arrivals with the warm precision of someone who had been planning this evening for a long time. The man who came through the door at 7:12 was wearing the brown jacket. He had exchanged the turned collar for a clean one. The jacket was the same. The worn fold at the collar was the same. He walked in with a contained, unhurried posture that Stephen recognized as the posture of someone who did not need to demonstrate that he belonged somewhere in order to belong there. He looked at Stephen. Stephen looked at him. It was B, emerging from the service station with 2 water glasses and the particular economy of someone who named things, because naming them was useful, who stopped in the threshold of the room and said, in her plain, even voice, "That's the Holt man, that's the buyer." Dolores, who had been crossing toward the new arrival with her hand extended and her best greeting already forming, stopped walking. The room had 8 people in it, and they all registered the stoppage in the way rooms register a pause, not loudly, but with complete attention. Maren looked at Dolores with the same unhurried composure he brought to the card table, the look of someone who had played this hand before and was not anxious about how it would land. He took her hand and shook it, properly, and said, "Miss Crane, thank you for having me." Dolores said, "Of course," and it came out correctly because she was good at this, and then she looked at him with the specific expression of someone reassembling a room they had misread. "I believe you've already met my floor manager," she said, turning to Stephen, which was the right thing to say in the circumstance, and may have been the most honest thing she had said about Stephen in some time. "I have," Maren said. He looked at Stephen. "Several times." There was a breath in the room. Stephen said, "Can I take your jacket?" Maren smiled at that, a small, real, unhurried smile, and shrugged out of the jacket and handed it over with the deliberate ease of someone who understood exactly what the exchange meant. Stephen carried it to the coat rack in the corridor and hung it between a grey wool overcoat and a woman's navy blazer, and he stood there for a moment in the corridor with his hand on the worn collar, in the cold, quiet air outside the room, and breathed. The dinner proceeded. Stephen managed the floor for the first course and the second, not because Dolores had asked him to stay, but because the room needed managing, and he was the person who knew how. Martin came in at 8:30, and Stephen handed him the floor with a word and a look and went behind the bar to finish what needed finishing. He heard from the bar the conversation at the main table shift, from pleasantries into the concrete business of what the Meridian was and what it might be, and what kind of value it held in the different directions you could consider it. He heard Dolores presenting the numbers she had been preparing for a month, the careful, competent case for the property and the clientele, and the 19 years of reliable operation. He heard Maren asking questions in the measured, specific way he had at the card table. Questions that understood the room before the answer arrived. At a certain point, Maren said, in a voice that carried comfortably to the bar, "I've been coming in on Tuesday evenings for the past 7 weeks, getting to know the room." A pause at the table. "The thing that holds this place together," he said, "is the floor. You know that." Stephen kept his hands on the bar and looked at the glasses. Dolores said carefully, "I'm glad the floor made an impression." "It did," Maren said. "I'd want to talk about that, about what stays and who." The evening wound down the way evenings do when business has reached a natural pause that is not a conclusion, but is not nothing. The guests left in pairs the way they had arrived. Dolores walked Maren to the door with the composed warmth of someone who had recalibrated completely and was doing it well because she was good at this, and Maren shook her hand a second time and looked past her once, briefly, at Stephen behind the bar. When the room was empty and the service staff had gone, Dolores came to the bar. She stood on the other side of it and looked at Stephen with an expression he had not seen on her before, which was not quite shame and was not quite calculation, but was in the territory between the two where people stand when they have been caught being less than they intended. She said, "You knew." "Not until Tuesday," he said. "You could have told me," she said. Stephen looked at her. "He asked me to come back Thursday," he said. "He didn't tell me why. I came because he asked me to." Dolores was quiet for a moment. "I said something," she said. Earlier this month. You heard it? Stephen looked at the bar. Yes, he said. She did not ask him to forgive it. She was not, in Stephen's experience, a person who asked for those things easily. She said, I have not been as attentive as I could have been, which was as close as she was going to come to it tonight, and possibly ever. It was, in its way, true. I know you think well of this place, he said. I think well of it too. She nodded once, which was both an answer and a departure, and went to collect her coat. Bea was wiping down the service station when Stephen came around from behind the bar. She looked at him the way she always looked at him, which was with the fond, unsurprised attention of someone who had expected this particular ending and found that expectation entirely satisfying. The buyer, she said. Yes, Stephen said. The man in the brown jacket, she said. Yes, Stephen said. Bea set down her cloth and picked up her bag and looked at him for a moment. You treated him well, she said. I treat everyone well, he said. You treat everyone politely, Bea said. You treated him well. She went out through the side entrance, pulling her coat closed against the November cold. Stephen heard the door settle behind her with the particular click it made when the latch caught properly. He stood in the empty supper club for a moment. The candles were out. The good linen was being folded in the kitchen. The room looked the way it always looked after service, familiar and quiet and slightly larger when no one was in it. All the geometry of the place visible without the bodies that usually filled it. He had stood in this room more evenings than he could accurately recall, and he felt for it. Now, the complicated affection you feel for a place that has held you through its own limitations. He put on his coat and turned off the bar lights and walked to the corridor for his things. Maren was standing at the side entrance. He had the brown jacket back on, the collar turned up in the way Stephen knew. He had his hands in his pockets and he was waiting with the same unhurried patience he brought to the card table. And Stephen understood, without being told, that he had been there for a while. He said, You waited. I did, Maren said. Stephen stood in the corridor with his coat half-buttoned and looked at the man he had been sitting across a card table from for 7 Tuesday evenings. You could have told me, Stephen said. I could have, Maren said. I didn't want anything to change. At the table. I wanted to know what it was when nothing had changed. Stephen looked at him. What did you find out? He asked. Maren said, that you play honestly, that you're good at the job you do, that you notice things that aren't obvious. A pause. That when someone you don't know is having a difficult evening, you refill their glass and tell them it'll settle down. Stephen looked at the floor. I lost the compass, he said. You didn't lose it, Maren said. He reached into the jacket pocket and held it out, flat on his palm. The brass was warm and familiar, the dial worn smooth. It was in the pot. I gave it back. Stephen looked at it. He picked it up and felt the weight of it, the particular weight of something you have carried for a long time and recognize in the dark. What was in the folded paper? He asked, though he knew. My name, Maren said. My real name, so you could decide what to do with it. Stephen turned the compass over in his hand. He thought about the 7 Tuesdays. He thought about the dish towel and the coffee cup and the particular quality of the silence that had developed between them over 7 evenings in a room where the lamp was from Bea's house, and the stakes were low, and the company was plain and decent. He thought about being asked to play honestly and finding that it cost him nothing he was not willing to give. He put the compass in his coat pocket. There's a diner on Marsh Street, he said. They stay open past midnight on Saturdays. Maren looked at him. I know that place, he said. Come on then, Stephen said. He opened the side door and the November air came in, cold and clean and carrying the particular smell of the season. He held the door. Maren walked through it. Stephen followed, pulling the door close behind him until he felt the latch catch properly. the way it was supposed to.